what's the understanding of ego? And he said, well, which one do you want? And I said, well, how many different understandings or definitions are there of ego in psychology? And he says, well, I could list at least 10 of them right off the top of my head. And that really showed me that even in the realm of psychology, that some of these terms like ego or self have different definitions. And the same thing happens in spirituality. Many different things are meant by the word ego. So that's what I mean when I say it's sort of an unfortunate word, simply because it has so many different meanings to so many different people. So it's always important even when ego is part of any discussion, that we know in what context it's being used. For the moment, in this particular context, I'm using ego as that movement, that psychological process of, number one, division, which is based on the perception of you being separate from the world at large. And also division in a psychological sense, an inner division, different forces, different thought patterns, different emotions, competing for space within you. That sort of division sets up a friction, of two things moving against each other. And that friction is what you feel is sort of a garden variety division at the egoic level, that there's a certain underlying sense of unease, that can flare into something big, when you're, as they say, when your buttons get pushed, that friction inside can all of a sudden bloom in you, and you feel it very, very overtly, and you may then express it. So ego in the sense of division, inwardly, psychologically, ego in the sense of an image of yourself in your mind, ego in the sense of a sort of self-obsession. In other words, the ego is its concern is with itself predominantly, its own survival and its own well-being as an ego structure. So that's sort of a long diversion. Now we can get back to the question Jim was asking. So when you transcend ego, it seems like it's not there, but then at some point it will resurrect itself, let's say. The raw energy of it can still be there. And try to reoccupy sort of the center of one's regard, the center of one's consciousness. And of course, once you've awoken beyond it, even if it's been a transcendent scene, you'll know that ego structure isn't you, but that doesn't mean in and of itself that that's going to be powerful enough to keep you from getting caught in it, from getting, pulled into its orbit now and then, or maybe for continuously. And for some people that have these big spiritual shifts and then have the ego come back in, this can be very disappointing, very painful, very, very difficult. For others, the ego is maybe sort of given up or lost its power. And so whatever there is left of the ego structure really doesn't have the energy, the wherewithal to reestablish itself. For other people, the ego structure can reestablish itself in a very definite way, and because the ego structure can then get sort of, it will fight against the transcendent vision. It can even see it as a threat, maybe even a threat to its survival. And so you'll sense this desire not to be once again caught in that division of ego, into that internal psychological friction, you could say. And I like how Jim put it, basically, can you say something that will sort of push push me over the cliff, push me over that line where, where something powerful will happen that will just, so one can be done with the whole egoic mess all at once. One can't eliminate their own ego. One can't get rid of it. In fact, that's one of the frustrations of ego, is that it can't get rid of itself. It may want to, but it can't really do it. What can be done is to make just feel the difference between ego, mind, division, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually. And so all that's, we could say, the content of your awareness. And the being, the conscious being or aware being, and I don't mean a being, but being as such, the aware being that the content occurs in. Now, I'm not saying that you should try to be in one of those two experiences to the exclusion of the other, not that you would use one to hide from the other or to deny the other, because the only thing that denies ego is ego, of course. But to start to notice the difference between the content of experience, the content of consciousness, and what underlies the content. In other words, the knowing or the seeing of the content. The content is what has sort of emotion, it has a sort of emotional gravity. The content sort of has this way of pulling your attention into it spontaneously. The more conscious you become, the less susceptible you are to this pulling, the more you notice it before it's really fully, taken hold of you. But first simply start to notice in your experience and to experience the difference between the content and what the content arises in. Now, this isn't going to be a cure for the ego, necessarily, but it provides a contrast. That space of being provides a contrast for the ego structure. The letting go, or probably more accurately to say the letting be, is a significant key here. In other words, to let your experience be, even the movement of ego to be, to let it be, to allow it to exist, to let the experience of it exist, so you're not trying to push it away. This is a key, because as soon as you go into a relationship with the ego structure, positive or negative, then you're caught in it. Then its gravitational pull has pulled you in. So you might experiment a little bit with what is it to have no relationship with the content of consciousness. By no relationship, I do not mean to have a relationship of denial, to deny the content of your experience or to try to get away from the content of your experience. Because to deny it or to try to move away from it is to have a relationship with it. Of course, to grasp it and and indulge in it also is to have a relationship. But what would it be like to have no relationship for or against? You see, the state of being, that state of conscious being, is already in that sort of non-relationship. It's sort of a neutrality. And it's that neutrality to get more and more familiar with. And I don't just mean in your mind, but also allow your being, your body, your subtle body, and also your gross physical body to pure being, or conscious being, has a certain energetic signature to it. And what happens, a lot of people will touch into the space of pure being, conscious being, and they'll kind of go in their mind, okay, yes, I can sense it, okay, that's it, got it. And they don't actually really let their whole body, their whole subtle body, get imprinted with that energetic signature. And if you don't allow your whole being and your body to get imprinted with that energetic signature, then when you go to act in the world, when you are challenged, or just at any time of the day, your tendency is, on an energetic level, is going to be to go back into an old, familiar sort of energetic groove, an energetic pattern. The conditioned self, we could say. The conditioned self is also a particular type of energy. It has its own signature. And so it's very important that when you become aware in that state of being, of aware being, conscious being, that you are patient and you allow your whole being, your whole nervous system as well, to get its energetic signature. Because see, here we're not trying to transcend the self, or transcend the ego. To transcend the ego, especially in this case, has already been experienced. To transcend the ego does not, in and of itself, completely deal with the whole issue of ego. As so many who've transcended ego can attest to. To transcend the ego is not the sort of final solution to ego. Because to transcend something means it's still there, it's still waiting, it can still grasp you. So I'm not talking about trying to transcend it. You see, it might sound like that, but I'm not talking about that at all. So I'm not talking about trying to intentionally create any distance between you and the ego, between you and that inner division or struggle. What I'm pointing at is, if there's a real simple stopping in the moment, in this moment, might as well. If there's a stopping meaning you're not having a positive or negative relationship with the content of consciousness, with the content of experience. In that moment, then your whole being, as I said earlier, your whole nervous system starts to experience and orient itself to a different energy, a different dimension, the dimension, we could say, of being. And that dimension of being, you don't have to get distance from the ego structure. You don't have to try to witness it from far away. You see, because the true witnessing doesn't take place at a distance. The true witnessing is always right in the middle of whatever is being experienced. So distance is not necessary. Transcendence at this point is not what's called for. It's not what the moment indicates. It's, how can we say, to discover being right in the midst of the ego structure.